Hey, how's it going, folks? This is Hellbent, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to use simple arrays in AutoHotkey. If you've already watched previous tutorials by other people and you're still lost, don't worry. By the end of this, I promise you, you are going to understand exactly how to create a simple array. And what we're going to do is we're going to change things from the way I normally do my tutorials, where I break everything down and just use like the simplest message box kind of thing, input box. With this, we're going to get a little bit more complicated, and we're going to actually introduce some things I haven't covered, but no worries. We are going to get through this, and you're going to understand everything because we're going to do it step by step. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a little program that is going to record mouse clicks. And like I said, there's a bunch of different commands that we're going to be introducing, and I'm going to come back to them later on and do better tutorials on those specific commands, but for now we'll be fine with what we have. So okay, so with the arrays, the first thing we want to do is we want to declare our array. And the way we're going to do that is we're just going to create some global variables. And if you don't know what a global variable is, you need to go back and watch the tutorial on variables, because knowing your variables is like, you have to know your variables and how to use variables in programming languages. If you don't know that, like, don't worry about all the other stuff. You need to know how to use variables. So go watch variables tutorials and then come back to this. Okay, so like I said, we're going to use a global variable because we're going to be creating some functions. And I haven't done my functions tutorial, but maybe this, you're watching this, 6 months from now, 5 months from now, and I've already created that. So you might want to go watch that as well. Okay, so anyways, I got my global variable, and I'm going to declare a variable, but this is going to be my array. And actually what I need is 2 sets of arrays. So the first one I'm just going to call, so we're going to be using our click location. So we need one for our X locations and one for our Y locations. So I'm just going to pick a name. So let's go with X location. X location array. So that's the name of the variable I'm going to be using. And now to declare it as an array, all I do is just like a normal variable. So with a normal variable, I would put a value here, or I would just declare it and leave it blank till later. If I want to use an array, what I need to do is that. And there we go. We have an array. Now let's do our Y location. So global, and then this is our Y location. I don't know how long this specific tutorial is going to take. It's probably going to take a couple of episodes to get through it, because the program that I'm going to be doing is probably about 200 lines of code, and I don't do these specific things every day, so I have to think about it, and I also want to explain it to you, which is going to take more time. Okay, so anyways, we got this. I'm going to make it an array. Oops. Okay, so there we go. We have our 2 arrays. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a counting variable, and once again, if you don't know what counting variables are, go back and watch the tutorial on variables. So normally I don't really need to make this variable a global variable, because usually with these kind of variables, they're more local. But in this case, I'm just going to do it. So we got I, and I equals 0 to begin with. Okay, and I should probably put this up above. I'll put it right up here. Okay, because I might come back and do more the other kinds of arrays that you can use in AutoHotkey. Okay, so now I need to think about what I'm going to be doing. Now, the last time I wrote a program like this, I had interfaced it into a GUI, but I'm not going to be doing that this time. Instead, I'm just going to be using hotkeys. But what I do need is I know that I need a get mouse position. So I'm going to create a function that I'm going to call get x and y. So this is my function. And inside of my function, let's see, how am I going to do this one? So I think this is where I'm actually going to load my array. So what I need to do in here is each time I run this, I'm going to want to reset the value of I again. So what I'm going to do is inside of this, I'm going to say I colon equals 0. So that way, if for some reason I run it again, it's automatically going to reset the value of I again for us. Let's see. Next, I'm going to create a variable, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be checking over and over again to see if I've pressed down on my mouse button. So what I want to have is I want a variable. So its first state is hopefully going to be the mouse button's pressed up. So what I need to do is I'm going to create a variable that's going to say, okay, when I start it, if the mouse is pressed, if it's up, if I haven't pressed the mouse button, it's going to change the value of a variable. So that way, in a second later, it's going to check to see if that variable's new value is valid. If it's true, then it's going to actually, when I do press down on my button, it's actually going to add that location as our into our array. So what I need, like I said, I need a variable. So I usually use this as my variable, but I was thinking about it the other day and it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but I like this one, so I'm going to use it. So the variable I'm going to call is pressed. It's kind of backwards, but you'll see what I'm talking about in a few minutes. But is pressed, it's going to equal 0 to begin with, and now we can create a loop. And we're just going to have an infinite loop. And inside of our loop, all of our business is going to go on. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to get the location of my cursor. And the way we do that is we type in mouse get position, or get POS, and then we're going to create two temporary variables. So I'm going to call it temp x for my x location. So I'm temporarily going to load the location of x into a temporary variable, and then later on we're going to load that into a more permanent variable. Let's see, what else? We need another variable for our y, so temp y, and then that's it for that. Now what I want to do is I'm going to introduce another thing called the tooltip. Now this is simple. If you ever hover over something like you see this set current platform, that's a tooltip. If I come over here, that's a tooltip, that's a tooltip. So we're going to have a tooltip that follows around our cursor. If you ever watched my old tutorials before I got this new recording software, you would have seen that I had an arrow, and that arrow was a tooltip. So we're going to create a tooltip, so it's just tooltip, and then we're going to put in brackets, or in percentage marks, we're going to put our two variables. And our variables are temp x and temp y. Okay, and let's see. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to check what the state of my mouse button is. So I believe it is GetKeyState. Okay, yes it is. It's GetKeyState. And I need a variable that I'm going to assign to this. So I'm going to call this left mouse. And these variables don't really mean anything. These are just names that I'm picking that will make sense for me to read back later on. There is, in AutoHotkey, there is pre-written variables that you can use, but up till this point, we've never used those. All the variables that I'm using, I'm just coming up with the names for them for myself. Okay, so GetKeyState, we have the variable that we're going to assign, and now what we need to do is we're going to say that it's for the left button. And we're going to do it again for the right mouse click. So once again, GetKeyState, and this is going to be our right mouse, and it's going to be our right button. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to declare thing. I've never really gotten clear on this part, exactly why I do the GetKeyState up here and then just below it I do this next part. But when I was learning it, this is the way I learned how to do it, so this is the way that I'm going to show you how to do it. And if I can't explain exactly why, oh well. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our our left mouse button, our left mouse, and we are going to declare that equals GetKeyState, and then right after that, in parentheses with quotes, we're going to put in our left button. So like I said, I'm not exactly sure why I do it this way right here, and then afterwards I do it like this. I've never actually tried omitting one of these parts, but I don't know. It's just, like I said, it's the way that I learned how to do it, and whatever. So now we're going to do the same thing with our right mouse, and GetKeyState. Now if I do a tutorial later on GetKeyState, because there's a lot of things that you'll have to learn for this if you want to use this for lots of different programs, I'll make sure that I brush up on exactly what's going on before I do that. Okay, and we need our right button. So the L button and R button, that's how in AutoHotkey it knows exactly what button we're talking about. Let's see. Okay, so we have that. It's gonna get GetKeyState from those two buttons, and now what we need is, let's see. Okay, now what I need to do is check to see if the mouse button, if the left mouse button is up and if the right mouse button is up. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say if, and I'll get rid of that, if left mouse, the variable left mouse, if left mouse equals true. No, sorry, false. I need it to be false first. If it's false, if the left mouse button is false, we're going to change the value of is pressed to 1. Okay. And next what we're going to do is we are going to check if our right mouse button, because we're going to use our right mouse button to tell it when to stop recording. So, or when to tell it to stop assigning new elements to our array. So we're going to say if get that out of the way. If our right mouse button or right mouse, our right mouse variable, if it equals true this time, if this guy equals true. What we're going to do is nothing for the moment, because I need to actually jump ahead and do something else. Okay, so immediately after this part, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if our isPressed variable actually equals 1. So we're going to have another if statement. If isPressed equals 1, and with this you can just do equals. I just when I was learning, I learned in C, and this is the way they taught me in C, so this is the way that I'm used to doing it. So unless I specifically know that I can't use equals equals, I always use equals equals. Okay, so isPressed, if it equals 1, let's see, what do we need to do? What we need to do is, just in case our cursor is moved a little bit, what we're going to do is we're going to get the key, we're going to get our mouse position again right away. So MouseGetPosition. MouseGetPosition, and we'll just assign it back to our temp X and temp Y again. Okay, let me think. Okay, so we assign that to that. So you know what, before I do that, I'm going to just copy this and then get rid of it, because before that, just because isPressed equals 1, what I actually still need to do is actually check to see if our left mouse button has been pressed now. If it equals true. And the reason why we have to set it up this way with these different hurdles that it has to go through is because we don't want it. If we didn't do it like this, what would happen is when we do finally press down our left mouse button, it's just going to constantly add in elements to our array. It's not. So what we actually want it to do is we only want it to record once when we press it down, and then stop recording until it's released back up again and then pressed back down again. Because if we don't do it this way, even if we hold our mouse button down for a fraction of a second, it's going to assign like 50 variables or 50 elements to our array, and we don't want that. We just want one at a time. So each time we click down and then back up and then back down again, it'll add new elements. So that's the whole reason why we're using this variable. Because once we do finally click down on this, we're going to change the value of this back to 0. So it's not going to be isPressed, left is true. It's going to actually have to wait until the mouse is false, the left mouse button is back up again, before it can actually change this again, which will be the only thing that will allow it come in here, which will be the only thing that will allow it to test this condition. Okay, so if it's true, we're going to paste in back this, and what do I do next? Let's see. We are going to add this location to our array, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to say that y, or sorry, I should start with x location array, x location array, and then in here, or in this, I'm going to add my first element, and the thing that I'm going to wait to use my elements, is I. So right now I equals 0. And with programming, usually the first element in something is going to be 0. So right now I'm going to store a value into this array in its 0th position, which is its first position. So what we're going to end up with is, if I come down here, is, let's say, instead of me typing out that array's name over and over again, I'm just going to, let's just shorten it to A. So right now A actually equals X location array and that. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in this location here a value, and it's going to be a 3-digit value. And then we're going to do, once we go over it again, we're going to actually add to its next position, and we're going to add another location, and then we're going to add another location or another element. And it's going to have its own 3-digit, right? And we're just going to keep, every single time we press down our button, it's going to increase the value of our I, because this is our I is going to be a placeholder for this actual values. And you'll see how we do that in a second. So here, so I hope you understand what we're going to be doing, and you'll see it as we go through more. Okay, so we have it written down here, and what we're going to say is this equals the value that is currently stored in our temp x variable. So the first element is going to now equal the value of this. And we need to do the same for our y. Y location array. Just remember that X location array is just a name. It doesn't, I can name it anything I want. I'm just using this name because it makes sense. I can understand what it's doing, and that's how you want to name your variables. And once again, I'm going to have this as I. So both of these are going to store the value of I, or the element value of I, which is currently 0. So the 0th position, which is actually the first position in our array. We're going to colon equals, and this one is going to equal the value that's currently stored in the variable temp y. Now what we're going to do is, now that we've added that value, we're going to have it run again, obviously, because we put this in a loop. So what we need to do is, so that way we don't keep overriding that I value, what we're going to actually do is we're going to take our I variable and we're going to increment it by 1. So we're just going to say I plus plus, which means take the value of I and add 1 to it. Another way we could write that is I equals, or colon equals, I plus 1. Another way we could write that is I plus equals 1. So all of them mean the exact same thing, but we're just going to go with the I plus plus. So before this moment, I equals 0. As soon as it gets to this point, it's now going to equal 1. And if we run it through again, once it gets to this point, it's going to add 1 to it again, so it's going to become 2. So we're constantly increasing our place in our array. Okay, so let me think. What do I need in here? We need to now reset the variable is pressed. Back to 0. So we've reset our variable back to 0. So let me go through this so that way I know where I am and that way you know where you are. And then I'm gonna cut this video and we'll pick it up in part 2. So we have our function getXY. as soon as the function starts, it changes the value of I to 0 and the variable is pressed to 0. So no matter what, we know that our variables are in the right value that we need them to be. And then it's going to go into a loop. It's going to get the current location of our cursor, and then it's going to pop up a tooltip that's going to display it so that way we can actually visualize where we're at. We don't actually need the tooltip, but it's nice to actually be able to see. Plus it'll tell us when we're actually recording, and you'll see that later on. Then what it's going to do is it's going to assign that the left mouse button is equal to GetKeyState for each of those, the right and the left. Left mouse, if our left mouse button is up, it's going to assign the variable is pressed a value of 1. We're going to ignore this for the moment. If our variable is pressed equals 1, it's going to come into this if statement, and which is immediately followed by another if statement, which is going to check to see if our left mouse button has actually been pressed, if it's in its down position. If it's in its down position, it's going to make sure that our cursor hasn't moved from since the last time we got that position. It's only going to be a fraction of a second, like the fraction of a second since the last time it checked it, but it can play a role in it, so why not just get it again. As soon as it gets it, it's going to assign that value into the next open space in our array for each of them. Then it's going to increment the value of I up 1, and then it's going to reset the variable is pressed back to 0, so that way when it comes back up to the top of the loop again, if our mouse is still pressed, it's not going to immediately jump back into this and constantly increase our array when we don't want it to. Okay, so that's that. We'll pause here and we'll pick it up in part 2.